I'm Mayah Rose.
And I'm Gerald Rogers.
And today we're going to be talking about a really important aspect of relationships called redos.
Redos are a really important tool because how many of you have ever experienced making a mistake or saying something stupid or reacting to your partner when something happens and instantly regretting it? It's like, oh my gosh, I should not have done that. How many of you have ever noticed yourself doing things that have hurt in some ways your partner or the relationship? And sometimes you just need that magic Etch-a-Sketch. You need to just like rewind and just like erase that, or get the magic eraser and just like, hey, can we actually redo that? Pretend that didn't happen. There's a process that can be done to repair, and to actually not just repair, but to make things stronger than they used to be. And so we had an experience like this in our relationship where we had this conversation, and during that conversation we both got triggered, and in that trigger we like noticed ourselves shutting down, and we didn't like we're not like angry people that yell or fight or say mean things. That's just not us, right? We didn't do that, but we noticed that in that situation that we began to shrink and withdraw and disconnect from each other.
Well, and what happens is, for those of you who've studied avoidant versus anxious attachment styles, Gerald has an avoidant attachment style and I had more of an anxious attachment style. So we had this conversation, he got triggered, I got triggered, he went into his avoidant pattern, I went into my anxious pattern, so he just wanted to be left alone. I'm like, oh, are you okay? Are you okay? Do you still love me? Do you still love me? And we just noticed that there was a lot of hurt and pain from this conversation, and it triggered things in us. We were behaving in ways that we didn't want to behave. Now, when this happens, there's two options. Number one, you keep behaving in the same way. You keep going down the same path. You continue to hold on to that hurt, that resentment of what the other person said, or that anger towards yourself or towards them for the way that you behaved in that situation. You can continue in your attachment style, whether it be avoidant or anxious, or second choice is you can create a redo. So here's what we do in our relationships.
And I think this is really important to notice, that I think for a lot of us, our tendency is to take those memories and take those experiences and store them away. And we don't address them. We don't talk about them. We just want to just brush away. But deep down, they're stored in some closet, you know, in our soul. And then when something else happens, we remember that old experience and we bring up that memory either as ammo to attack our partner or as validation that says, see, it's not safe for me to share because this is what happened last time. And so it's really easy to build all of these old memory patterns and store them away that block us from actually being able to create what we want. And so this is a way to address it so much quicker and to resolve it, and not only to release the energy or charge for it, but actually to rebuild a level of trust that is so much deeper than you experienced prior to the negative experience happening.
So here's what you do in a redo. The first step is to notice that you've been triggered and you're going down a path that you don't want to go down. So first step is just to notice it's awareness. Awareness that you've had a conversation, a discussion, that something has happened, you feel triggered, you're going into an old pattern, you're creating something that you don't want to create. So number one's awareness. Number two
is asking for a redo. When you can simply be aware and then acknowledge that something happened, then you can go to your partner and it's like, hey, I recognize that earlier today or yesterday when we had this conversation that it didn't go the way that I wanted it to. And I noticed myself feeling disconnected, and I noticed that, you know, you and I might have been hurt in that conversation, and I don't want that. What I really want is for us to feel even more connected and for us to like really heal this part. Could we have a redo, please?
Now, this will only work if both partners are on board. You can't really do a redo by yourself. So it's important, if you're listening to this and you think it's valuable for maybe your partner to hear, they might want to know about it, that you share this information with them so that if the opportunity ever arises, they know what a redo is and they can choose to be on board with it or not.
Yeah, and I think the other thing that's important about redo is this is not you trying to get the other person to apologize. It doesn't work that way, right? This is about you taking accountability. It's just like, hey, I recognize I did and said some things that might have hurt you. This is a very accountable way of approaching communication. It's like, hey, I realize I did some things that I regret and I said some things that might have hurt you. Can we have a redo, please? Because I would love to redo them. It's not you asking them to, do things better.
So in our experience the other day, when Gerald and I had a conversation, we found ourselves both triggered. It was at night, we went to bed. He kind of went into his more of his avoidant pattern. He didn't want to snuggle, he didn't want to touch. And I went into my anxious pattern of, I don't like this. And I woke up the next morning and I just thought, I don't feel aligned. I don't feel connected. I don't feel good within myself. So I got to approach Gerald and I said, Gerald, would you be open to doing a redo of this conversation?
Yeah, and the other person may or may not be. It's okay if they're not quite ready for that, because maybe they got really hurt. Maybe they're not quite ready to actually address that. But for the long-term health of a relationship, there will be a time when they are. And if they're not ready then, it's just like, hey, if you're not ready right now, just let me know when you are, because I really want to feel connected to you again. Mm-hmm. And so when it is time for the redo, then it's actually just creating space. Creating space where you're free from distractions, your phones are off, you don't have any other appointments, and you can just be fully present. And then you just rewind, right? And just like go back to that exact moment. It's like, all right, let's have this conversation again. And start it the way you started it. But this time, allow your highest self, your wounded self, to have the conversation.
Mm-hmm. And this is so powerful. Again, just to be able to recap, number one is awareness. Awareness that you have had a conversation or an argument or something that you didn't like how you showed up. Number two is being able to ask for a redo, to approach your partner and say, would you be willing to have a redo of this conversation with me, and waiting for them to consent to that. Number three is creating space for that. So making sure that you aren't distracted, making sure this isn't like a little thing like, oh yeah, let's do this really quickly. It's really creating the container for this. And the reason why is because you're actually creating a new memory with new emotions. And number four is rewinding and doing the conversation. And if you've set the space properly, and if you and your partner are both willing to do this, when you have that new conversation, it replaces the old one. Those old angry emotions or those hurt parts of you that then can lay to rest. And you now have this new memory of a conversation as your highest and best self with your partner. And this is so phenomenal. It will do so many things for you in your relationship.
Yeah, it really is like that magic eraser tool, which heals and makes you feel so connected. And I think it's useful to be able to like pause. Like, I don't think having triggers is a bad thing in relationships. I don't. It's only bad if you ignore them and if you keep letting the triggers and the trauma direct all of your decisions in the future. But if you recognize the trigger, you recognize the trauma, you can allow them to be invitations to heal, then all of a sudden, those exact same experiences can be the greatest things to help you draw closer in partnership and connection. Mm-hmm. So every time I notice that I've been triggered, it has come from remembering an old trauma from the past, and to be able to bring that to my Rose, it's like, hey, I recognize when this happened, I felt this way, and it really was, this old belief that's been showing up. Can we have a redo? And when you have the redo conversations, you can be fully resourced. Oftentimes when we're triggered, it's because we're tired or we're hungry or we're exhausted or we're stressed and we're just not in a situation to actually interact in a healthy and loving way. But when you have the redo conversation, make sure you're rested, make sure you have food, make sure that you're in a good space, make sure you're really present, make sure your highest best self can be there, both to listen and also to communicate your desires. And these are tools that really transform old broken patterns into new healthy ones.
Mm-hmm. And remember, not only is this your relationship, this is your life. So make it legendary.